There is someone out there who is deeply, almost uncontrollably in love with you. And this is not the usual kind of love that people talk about lightly. It is the type that feels overwhelming, intense, and hard to explain even to themselves. But what might surprise you is that the reason behind this feeling is not as flattering as it first seems, because it has very little to do with the version of you that people see on the surface. Instead, it is connected to what you unknowingly activated inside them, something much deeper than ordinary attraction. And once you understand this, your view of this connection may never feel the same again. Most people are raised to believe that love grows from simple things, like attraction, shared interests, good timing, or personalities that naturally fit together. That idea feels safe and easy to accept. It gives the mind a sense of order and control, but comfort often hides deeper truths, and the mind prefers simple explanations because it avoids looking into emotional depth that feels uncomfortable or confusing. It avoids anything that might challenge the way we understand ourselves and others. The reality is that the kind of love that feels intense, confusing, and almost impossible to release does not begin in the conscious mind. It does not come from a clear decision or a logical thought. It begins much deeper, in the unconscious part of a person, where thoughts are not organized and where feelings exist before language can explain them. Without knowing it, you stepped into a hidden emotional space inside them, a part of their inner world they may have ignored for a long time. You did not just make them feel happy or interested. You made them feel seen in a way that reached parts of them they usually keep hidden. And that kind of feeling can be both beautiful and frightening at the same time. Because when someone feels truly seen at that level, it does not create simple affection. It creates emotional intensity, something that can feel overwhelming and hard to control or understand. Many people misunderstand this kind of reaction. They think being loved simply means being liked or appreciated. But what is happening here goes much deeper. You have triggered something inside them, a recognition of emotions or parts of themselves they may have pushed away long ago. You became a kind of mirror, reflecting back something they were not fully ready to face. None of this happened because you planned it. You did not follow any strategy or try to influence them in a specific way. You were simply yourself, but your presence carried something they were not prepared for. Something about you could not be easily explained or reduced into a simple category in their mind. And that is what disturbed their usual inner balance. Over time, people build mental and emotional walls to protect themselves. They suppress certain desires, hide certain emotions, and create a version of themselves that feels controlled and safe. But when you appeared in their life, some of those inner walls began to weaken without them realizing it. In some areas, those defenses stopped working the way they used to. This is what makes the experience so complex. What they feel is not a simple or clean emotion. It is a mixture of attraction, confusion, fear, longing, and emotional projection. You did not just draw them closer to you. You also disrupted the inner structure they had carefully maintained for years. And when the unconscious mind is disturbed, it doesn't feel like chaos at first. It often feels like destiny or something meant to happen. You did not need to do anything dramatic to create this effect. You did not need perfect words or calculated actions. What you did was interrupt their usual emotional pattern. And the human mind depends heavily on patterns to feel stable. When something breaks those patterns, it becomes difficult to ignore or forget. But your presence was not chaotic. It felt meaningful to them, even if they could not explain why. It felt symbolic, like you represented something larger than just a normal person in their everyday life. And because of that, their mind started projecting meaning onto you. You became connected to questions they had not even clearly formed within themselves. At that point, they stopped seeing you only as who you are. Instead, they started seeing you as something that represented answers, emotions, or missing parts of their own inner world. And once this happens, the emotional bond does not stay at a surface level. It becomes deeper, more consuming, and harder to separate from personal identity. This is also why letting go feels so difficult for them, because releasing you would not just mean losing a person. It would also mean facing something within themselves that your presence revealed. And most people avoid that kind of inner confrontation, even if it causes confusion or emotional struggle. At the same time, this connection is not only about comfort or beauty. It also carries emotional intensity that can feel unstable. When deeply buried emotions rise to the surface, they do not always appear in a calm or organized way. They can create confusion, mixed signals, and emotional overload that neither person fully understands. You may notice this in subtle ways. There can be moments where their attention feels strong and focused on you, followed by moments where they seem distant or withdrawn. This is not always a change in feeling, but often a reaction to internal overwhelm. Something inside them gets activated, and then their mind tries to protect itself by pulling back. This creates a repeating cycle: closeness, then distance; intensity, then silence. And even if neither of you consciously chooses this pattern, it still continues, because it is not only happening on a surface level, but also in deeper emotional layers that are harder to control. You might also find that you are affected by this cycle as well. Even if you try to stay clear-minded, something about the emotional depth of this connection pulls your attention back into it. It feels like there is a weight to it, something that cannot be easily ignored or dismissed. So the real question becomes, what actually triggered this level of emotional intensity? Because it did not happen randomly, and it was not just ordinary attraction. There was a moment where something shifted inside them, a moment of recognition that changed how they relate to you and possibly to themselves. But this recognition was not based on appearance, behavior, or external qualities. It came from something deeper, something tied to their unconscious emotional world. You represent something that connects to both desire and fear inside them at the same time, something they have been drawn to and afraid of for a long time without fully understanding it. Until this is understood, the situation will continue to feel confusing. The intensity, the pull, the emotional contradictions, and the inability to fully detach will all remain difficult to explain. It can feel like something bigger than both of you is shaping the connection. In truth, what happened is that you did not simply create feelings in someone. You activated emotional material that had been buried for a long time. And once something inside a person is activated at that depth, it doesn't easily disappear. It continues to move, to grow, and to demand attention until it is fully acknowledged. At first, they may have tried to ignore it or reduce it. They may have told themselves it was temporary or not important. But over time, it only became stronger, because it was never based on surface attraction alone. It was coming from deeper emotional memory and unresolved inner material, and you became the trigger that brought it forward. Not because you forced it, but because your presence connected with something already waiting beneath the surface, something that had been stored for a long time in their unconscious mind. This is where things become complicated, because the unconscious mind does not wait for permission. It does not follow logic in the same way conscious thoughts do. It moves on its own timing, often in ways that surprise the person experiencing it. What may look like simple interest on the outside can actually be something much deeper inside. The stronger the emotion becomes, the more carefully it is often hidden. So, instead of expressing it directly, they may start observing you more closely, thinking about you repeatedly, replaying interactions, and trying to understand what they feel without fully being able to name it, not because they are choosing it, but because they don't seem to have a way to stop it. You have become connected to something inside them that is still unresolved. And emotional patterns that are not resolved are some of the strongest forces that influence human behavior. But what you may not clearly realize yet is that the intensity you are sensing is not only about you as a person. It is also about what you represent inside their inner world. Because in the language of the unconscious mind, people do not simply fall for individuals. They fall for symbols, emotional pictures, and meanings that the conscious mind cannot fully explain. And you became the symbol of something they either lost, never received, or were once made to believe they did not deserve. This is where it becomes overwhelming for them, because loving you forces them to face themselves, and that is something they can no longer easily avoid. Loving you brings forward a contradiction inside their inner world. One part of them wants to move closer, to feel understood, to feel emotionally alive in a way that only seems to happen around you. But another part resists just as strongly, not because they do not care, but because caring forces them to confront things they have spent a long time avoiding. And this inner conflict does not stay hidden. It appears in pauses, in mixed behavior, in moments of sudden closeness followed by sudden distance. You can sense it, that back and forth feeling, that experience of someone being pulled toward you while also seeming afraid to fully come near. The truth underneath this is simple. They are not confused about you. They are overwhelmed by what is happening inside themselves. They are overwhelmed by the emotional world you have stirred within them, by the parts of them that do not run on logic, but on memory, feeling, old pain, and deeply buried wishes. Parts that remember things they thought no longer mattered. Once those parts are activated, they begin to raise questions that do not have easy answers. Why does this feel so familiar? Why does it affect them so deeply? Why does it pull them closer at the same time it makes them want to step away? And this is when the inner split begins, not in loud ways, but in the private mental space where awareness quietly exists. Their conscious mind is trying to maintain stability, while their unconscious mind is pushing for emotional resolution. And emotional resolution often requires a kind of internal breaking before anything becomes whole again. So, they create distance, not because they want to lose you, but because they are trying to regain control over what they are feeling. They tell themselves that space will help them think clearly, that time will reduce the intensity, that if they step far enough away, the emotions will settle down. But distance does not weaken unconscious attachment. It often strengthens it, because physical separation removes the real person and replaces them with an inner version, and that inner version is where projection becomes strongest. You are no longer just a person living your life. You become an image in their mind, a presence shaped by emotion, carrying everything they cannot fully understand or process. And projections are not limited by reality. They expand, they grow, they become more emotionally important over time. This is why separation becomes so difficult for them, because they are no longer only attached to who you are in reality. They are attached to what you have become inside their inner world, and what you have become there feels like something they cannot find anywhere else. But underneath all of this intensity, there is something that keeps challenging it: doubt. Not because the feeling is fake, but because anything this strong naturally creates fear. Their mind starts telling them that love this intense must come with danger or consequences, that it cannot be trusted so easily, that it came too fast or went too deep too quickly. So fear appears alongside love, not to erase it, but to protect them from fully surrendering to it. Because full surrender would force them to face everything they have kept buried for years: old emotional pain, hidden truths, and parts of themselves they quietly believed were not worthy of being loved. So, instead of moving fully toward you or fully away, they stay in between, wanting you but resisting, thinking of you but trying to stop, feeling deeply but revealing very little. And that in-between state creates pressure that slowly builds without noise, until it reaches a point where something inside them can no longer hold it together, because the human mind is not designed to carry unresolved emotional conflict forever. Eventually, something has to give, and when it does not always look predictable. Sometimes it appears as honesty, a sudden emotional opening. Sometimes it appears as withdrawal. Sometimes it shows up as behavior that seems confusing or even self-destructive, because when the unconscious mind takes over, logic loses strength and raw emotion begins to lead everything. And that is the moment things begin to shift. The moment they can no longer convince themselves that this is just temporary or something that will pass on its own. The moment the connection demands to be recognized for what it truly is. What you need to understand is that this moment is getting closer whether they are ready or not, because what was awakened inside them is not something small, temporary, or shallow. It is not something that can be managed forever without consequence. It is asking for resolution, and resolution always comes with a cost. The only uncertainty left is what they will be willing to release in order to delay facing the full intensity of what they feel for you. At some point, internal bargaining stops. Emotional limits exist, and what they feel has already pushed past those limits a long time ago. You can feel it in the quiet moments between interactions. That heavy emotional tension that doesn't fully go away. It just stays, because what is forming inside them has already lost balance. And when emotional balance is lost, the mind always looks for release. But release does not always come in the form of clarity or understanding. Sometimes it comes in the form of emotional collapse instead. And this is where it becomes extremely difficult for them, because they are no longer dealing only with attraction. They are being pushed into contact with parts of themselves they have avoided for years, parts shaped by rejection, old emotional wounds, and quiet beliefs that they were either too much, not enough, or simply not deserving of real closeness. What disturbs them most is not just how strong the feeling is, but how easily it bypasses their normal mental filters. They are used to understanding attraction in familiar ways, with clear reasons, categories, and explanations that help them feel in control. Things that can be labeled and placed into a story that makes sense. But with you, that structure does not fully work. The experience does not stay inside those boundaries. It moves past logic and reaches something deeper, something that doesn't respond easily to control or explanation. And that lack of control is where resistance begins, because for them, control is not just preference. It is safety, It is how they maintain a stable sense of self. Their identity has been built over time through experience, expectation, and emotional protection. So when something enters their life that does not fit that structure, even if it is not harmful, it still feels destabilizing. And that creates hesitation. Not a simple hesitation, but something deeper and more automatic, like one part of them pulling back before they even fully understand why, while another part pulls them forward. In that space between those two forces, confusion grows, because they cannot easily explain why something that feels meaningful also feels unsettling at the same time. So they try to analyze it. They turn it over in their mind again and again, trying to force it into something familiar. But every explanation feels incomplete. It might explain one part, but never the full experience. And that gap creates tension on its own, because the mind naturally wants clarity. It wants certainty. It wants patterns it can rely on. But here, there is no clear pattern to settle into. Nothing fully predictable to hold on to. And what makes it even more intense is that the connection does not stop when you are not present. It continues in silence, in random thoughts, in emotional shifts that appear without warning. They may be focused on something completely unrelated, and then suddenly, something about you appears in their mind. A memory, a feeling, a shift in mood they cannot easily explain away, and because it does not feel like a choice, it starts to feel like something happening inside them rather than something they are creating. And this deepens the internal split even more. One part of them starts to accept that this is not ordinary, that it carries emotional weight that cannot be ignored. But another part becomes even more determined to reduce it, to explain it away as temporary, exaggerated, or situational.